Good morning. Today's video, like the Great Lakes, comes to you in 5 parts. Part 1, what is an allele? We are made of DNA, which is made of chromosomes, and each chromosome is made of genes. If these genes are different from one another, the different variations are referred to as alleles. Think of alleles as like different flavors of a gene. When we're talking about genetics in ball pythons, we're going to be talking about different genes, things like banana, pastel, lesser, Mojave, etc. A gene resides at a specific locus or location on a chromosome in 2 copies, one inherited from each parent. In most cases with the morphs that we're going to be talking about, if it's a recessive morph, it requires 2 copies of that gene in order for the animal to have a visual representation of that gene. If it's a true dominant, just 1 copy of that gene will override the other allele if it's not the same and still fully display that particular gene in the animal. And if the gene is incomplete dominant, 1 copy of it will result in slight variation in the visual appearance of the animal, but with 2 copies you would get the full effect of that gene. Part 2, what is an allelic combination? So in most cases, each gene is going to have its own place on the chromosome where it can exist all happy like. However, in some cases, multiple alleles can exist at the same locus on the chromosome, where the alleles might be different but compatible. When this happens, you can have similar results even with different genes because of the effect of those compatible genes at that specific locus. Now, sometimes you might still see some variation in the way those are expressed depending on the genes and the particular locus that they're located at. We refer to the genes that connect at these same locuses? Loci? Alexa, what's the plural of locus?
Locusts.
That was not helpful. I shall consult Google. Google says it's loci, so if genes connect at the same loci, we refer to them as allelic or being in the same complex. These combinations can have dramatic results in the visual appearance of an animal and can be accomplished using different genes within that complex. Part 3, complexes. And now that we have a basic understanding of alleles and how they work when multiple genes exist at the same locus, let's talk about the specific combinations. Now these combinations are referred to as allelic complexes. These are all based on Morph Market's Morphpedia, link in the doobly-doo, as of the recording of today's video. Now, information is constantly changing in this hobby. There's new information that's coming out, updated information. So I would go to Morphpedia or a similar resource that's updated regularly to get the most up-to-date information. On to the complexes. In the superstripe complex, we have the asphalt, gravel, spark, spectre, and yellow belly. In the spot nose complex, we have spot nose, Wookie, chocolate, SAR, and sable. In the spider complex, we have blackhead, champagne, hidden gene woma, and spider. In the mahogany complex, we have cinder, mahogany, and stranger. In the blue-eyed leucistic complex, we have bamboo, honey, lesser, mocha, Mojave, mystic, phantom, Russo, and special. In the black-eyed leucistic complex, we have creed, disco, fire, flame, lemonback, sulfur, and vanilla. In the acid complex, we have acid, confusion, and static. And in the 8-ball complex, we have black pastel, cinnamon, Enchi, Huffman, Jolt, and Razor. Part 4. What does this mean for calculations? So allelic genes are going to be passed on in a similar way to incomplete dominant genes, with a notable exception. First, a non-allelic example. Let's say you've got the parents of a lesser and a pastel in your pairing. We're going to put our punnet square on the table and our key. So we've got the capital L is for lesser, capital P for pastel, lowercase of both is going to be for the normal. So this is going to be our lesser parent. This is going to be our pastel parent. So you can see here we're going to have a 25% chance of the offspring being a pastel, having the 2 lowercase l's and 1 uppercase p. We're going to have a 25% chance of the offspring being lessers. We're going to have a 25% chance of the offspring being a lesser pastel. And we're going to have a 25% chance of the offspring having neither the pastel or lesser gene and being a normal. So they can pass on one gene, both genes, or neither, because each exists at a different locus on the chromosome. However, where it can get a little more confusing, let's say we've got one parent that's a lesser bamboo. So those are both in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, and they're paired with a Mojave, which is also in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. We're going to put our key over here in our Punnett square. I'm doing this one a little simpler just for demonstration's sake. So this is going to be the lesser bamboo parent, right? So because this is located at the same locus on the chromosome, these are basically the two alleles on that locus. So we've got the lesser gene and the bamboo gene both present on that specific locus. And then for the other parent, we've got a Mojave gene and then a normal gene. So in this case, what you've got a 50% chance of the babies being blue-eyed leucistic, right? So basically this one could get the lesser and the Mojave. This is a bamboo Mojave mix. Or they could get just the normal gene from this parent and wind up as a lesser or as a bamboo. But note, there is not the chance of the baby to inherit all three genes because the genes exist at the same locus, which can only hold two copies. So even though these are different genes, they exist at the same locus, so the offspring can only inherit two of them. Last example, and we're not going to worry about a Punnett square on this one. If you have a parent that has two allelic genes, they have to pass one of those on to the offspring. So if the parent is a cinnamon enchi, all of the offspring would be either cinnamon or enchi. They have to be one or the other because those are the only two options the parent has to pass on. But they cannot be both because that parent cannot pass on both. Unless, of course, the other parent is bringing those genes to the table as well. Part 5, the closing. I really hope you learned something today. I appreciate your patience sticking with me through the video. I know that it was a lot to go over. If you have questions, feel free to ask them or open up discussion down in comments. Hit that like and subscribe button down there somewhere, and I'll see you next time.